You're listening to the Michael Berry Show podcast, and we're glad you are. Tell your friends, share a link, and say thanks to our good friend Mac at Gallery Furniture, who makes it all possible. He sponsored our podcast, and he sponsors so much of what we do for veterans, for the community. He has a huge, huge heart. It's capitalism with a conscience. It's what it should be, and I hope that's an inspiration to all of us. It's why I buy my furniture at Gallery Furniture, because Matt gives back.
It's that time. Lock and load. The Michael Berry Show is on the air.
Before we get to politics, I got a fun story to start with. I try to not just beat you over the head with negative political news because I think that becomes a grind, and that's not the show I want to do anyway. So I want to start with a Nick Saban story. Now, I know some of you bristle when I say that because other than the Roll Tide fans, there's a lot of War Eagles out there, and you don't want to have to hear about Nick Saban. And I know many of you LSU Tigers bristle, mostly because you're jealous that he left and didn't come back because he was great, and the Mad Hatter was a goober, and that was before you knew he was groping women. But Nick Saban, in my mind, let's take this out of the context of what university he represents and wins for. Let's talk about a guy that wins. You didn't have to like Donald Trump, but he wins. Not just elections. Donald Trump wins in life because he's a winner, because I don't think he really enjoys winning. I think he hates losing. And, in my study of people, one thing I've found is that winners don't gloat in victory, or they don't really revel in victory. They don't enjoy victory. They don't spend a lot of time celebrating, which to the rest of us is weird because we want to win so that we can enjoy that moment. But for the truly amazingly great, most successful, I found that it is often the case that it's not the joy of winning they love. It is this horrible, painful, agonizing, debilitating experience of losing that they never want to feel again. They're fleeing from that moment at all times. And I think that's Saban. And the reason I say that is, you ever watch Saban after a victory? He's never happy. He's never gloating. He's not reveling in the moment. He's immediately going back and starting to study film for the next week or the next year so that he can hoist the trophy again, but not for the joy of hoisting the trophy, but because he can't bear the thought of Dabo or anyone else hoisting the trophy and not him, because that meant he lost. Well, this has nothing to do with politics, but it's a fun story. He's giving a speech, and he's talking about his wife, and he's talking about their high school reunion, her high school reunion, and he goes back with her to her high school reunion, and he's basically using the opportunity to brag about the fact that she's lucky she's with him because he turned out to be so successful when she wouldn't date him for a while because he worked at a gas station. And from there, I'll let you hear the story.
They had a homecoming day for Nick Saban. And all the guys I went to high school with and all the people, the family, came to it. It was a big deal. And it was wonderful. It really was. But when I was a kid growing up, my dad owned a service station. And we lived in the country. And my wife, I tried to date from the time I was in the 7th grade, she would never, ever date me. Never, ever go out with me. She had this guy named Mickey Schaefer that she was always boyfriend with. She was from the city. She went to East Fairmont. She was the queen bee, the drum majorette and all that stuff. And, I just could not get a date. And here I am, the country bumpkin out here, pumping gas every day. And in those days, it's full service now. I mean, it's not like today. Somebody comes in, pumps your own gas, you collect the money. I mean, you had to clean the windows, check the oil, change tires, mufflers, grease cars. I mean, I was filthy, dirty, black fingernails all the time. Could never get a date. Could never get a date. So finally, when I got in high school, we were pretty good. We were just a class AA school. She went to a big AAA school, and we always played them, and we beat them like a drum. But she finally noticed me. And I finally got a date. And she had dated this Mickey Schaefer guy for like 6 years. So when we go back for this reunion, lo and behold, Mickey Schaefer owns a service station. And Terry and I have been married for 42 years, so however many that was minus 5. So I said, I am not going to miss the opportunity to do a drive-by. Just to make sure she kind of knows how she picked. So we drive by Mickey Schaefer service station, and I said, see there, honey? There's your boy, Mickey Schaefer. I said, if you'd have married him, that's where you'd be now. She said, if I'd have married him, he'd be the head coach at Alabama now. So
behind every good man is a great woman. And Nick Saban is making the point that that's true in his life, and it's also true in mine. And today is the 53rd birthday of my sweet, sweet wife, Nandita. Nandita Venkateshwaran. I met her in Houston. She had just come here to the United States from India. She's a Telugu, which means the people from the state of Andhra Pradesh. She's from Hyderabad, big tech city for those of you who do business internationally. If you do business in India, there's a good chance you do it in Hyderabad. And the reason is because that's kind of become the Silicon Valley of India's tech community. That's where she's from. That's where her people are from. That's where her mother was from, but her father was in the Air Force, so they traveled around a lot. She was living in New Delhi at the time, and her dad thought it would be a good opportunity for her to come to the United States after graduating the Convent of Jesus and Mary and College of Jesus and Mary, and come to the United States and study and get a PhD and go back and teach in economics. Everybody in her family was either academics. Her grandmother was a university president, and and a close friend of Mahatma Gandhi. Interestingly, they have family has a lot of cool pictures of the two of them together, and everybody in the family is either an academic or military. Military wasn't something she wanted to do, even though her mother was in the Air Force. But economics was kind of where her father had steered her and where she wanted to go. She came to the University of Houston, and the reason she came to the University of Houston was because her father didn't want her to come to the U.S. and go to any city where they had family, because his point was, you're not going to go to the U.S. and live in a little India. You're going to go there and you're going to live the life. You're going to stay 2 to 3 years and come home, and you will always know that you lived in the United States. Well, I had other ideas, because a week after she got here, I met her. And that was 32 years ago. And if I've had any success since then, it's because of her standing behind me, encouraging me, motivating me, and, yes, knocking me down when I get a little too big for my britches. So to Nandita Venkateshwaran, now Barry, the mother of my children, my wife of 29 years, together for 32 years, a very, very happy birthday to the sweetest, most wonderful human being I've ever met.
Where I can't believe he just said that happens. The Michael Berry Show.
I really don't have to give an introduction to Judge Ken Starr. Depending on your age, Ken Starr represents different things. It might be the head of Baylor University. It might be the Clinton era. You may have seen him recently on Fox News. Ken Starr is one of these people like Huck Finn. They say you should read Huck Finn 3 different times during the course of your life, and it'll mean 3 different things. Well, depending on your age, that's probably how you identify Ken Starr and how you've tagged him as a bio. He's had a distinguished career in academia, the law, public service. He writes lots of books. He writes lots of articles. He's argued 36 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, including during his service as U.S. Solicitor General. And he has just written a book entitled Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty, which came out, interestingly, yesterday. Judge Starr, why write this book? What was the story that needed to be told?
It needs to be told because religious liberty, as so many of our liberties, are under assault. Think of freedom of speech and the cancel culture, but also think of those who are rising up on the progressive left and who are saying, we want to wipe out the freedom of conscience of conscientious objectors. You get with our program or you get off of this wonderful experiment called America. And I'm very distressed by it, and we really saw this, Michael, during the pandemic. It had started before then, but it reached high dudgeon, so to speak, in the pandemic with governors and mayors and so forth stepping in, ordering in very arbitrary ways the religious communities around, synagogues, churches, mosques, and so forth. You can have 50%. This is a real case. You can have 50% capacity at Caesar's Palace, but at Calvary Chapel, which can hold hundreds upon hundreds of people, you can have 50. There's something wrong with that picture. And happily, the Supreme Court, and this is the good news in the book, the Supreme Court over the past 40 years has been getting it right. And what's the it? The importance of religious freedom for all Americans, including people of no faith. It protects the conscience, it being the Supreme Court, protects the conscience of all persons. And that is a great, great blessing. It's what the founding generation called in the preamble to America's Constitution to preserve and secure the blessings of liberty. That's the words of the Constitution. The blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Well, we're the posterity, and we've got to now do what the founding generation did, and that is fight for freedom.
But Judge Starr, I agree that the pandemic or the reaction to the pandemic really exposed, to use the title of your book, Religious Liberty in Crisis. But wasn't religious liberty really in crisis before this, and this just gave people an opportunity, as Barack Obama famously said, to do that which they wanted to do, but in times of crisis you can get away with it?
Amen. Let's go back in time, but not so long. Let's go back to the Obama administration. The Obama administration took a radical position that Christian schools had no more rights under the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment than did the Boy Scouts or the Rotary Club. That position was rejected by the Supreme Court of the United States 9-0. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, now deceased, condemned the position of the Obama administration, both its Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EOC, and then the Obama Justice Department under Eric Holder that took that position and advancing it in the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court rejected that 9-0. And I tell that story. This book is 170 pages of stories that every person, every American, high schoolers can understand. The stories, and these are stories of freedom, and how the Supreme Court, will you agree with every opinion? Of course not. No one does, right? But time and time again, over these past, and I call it 40 years, from the first year of the Reagan administration, the court has been getting it right, with governors and mayors, and at times, yes, the federal government getting it wrong. It being the importance of religious freedom.
We had a ruling come down this past Friday that was a 5-4 ruling, and I want to get to Justice Roberts' position on this. But if you were arguing that case, it was the case of in-home Bible study, and the court ruled 5-4, again, limiting the power of the government to restrict gatherings for worship without regard to any particular faith. But I think this one was Christian in nature. If you were arguing for in-home Bible study and saying that the government should not be able to restrict this, even in a pandemic, whatever Fauci may say, what would be the case you would bring there? What would be your arguments?
I would bring three arguments. The winner, of course, is the free exercise of religion. But the second would be the privacy and sanctity of the home, which is protected by the Fourth Amendment. This is one of those, as I say in the book, Caesar, hands off. You stay out of our home except for the most compelling reasons, such as protecting precious, vulnerable children from child abuse or spousal abuse. And the third would be freedom of association, protected again by the Supreme Court, especially during the Civil Rights era. But by the way, we're at it again because California is trying to pry into who is donating money to nonprofit organizations such as pro-life organizations, and you can well imagine what will be done with that. So those are three, I would say, we had three powerful arguments based on the fundamental freedoms of a free people here in this country. And by the way, I'm just going to make a point of this. Why are people flocking at the border to get in? We can talk about, this is an immigration crisis. And I said, what's underlying it? People want to come to this sweet land of liberty. For all of our issues, we believe in freedom. Freedom is our baseline. That's what people want, including economic liberty, the ability to make a living. Well, guess what? You don't go to Venezuela. You get out of Venezuela. You don't move. You don't see people. Our Hispanic cousins and brothers and sisters, you don't see them packing up and moving to Guatemala, do you? And I don't mean to pick on Guatemala or Honduras. They are moving to the United States. And so I'm pontificating a little bit here, but it really disturbs me. It disappoints me, and I'm going to say even stronger that it angers me that there are those voices who simply say this is a bad country with a corrupt beginning because of slavery. Yes, slavery was unspeakably horrible, and no one will rise up to say, oh, well, that was just okay. Of course it was not okay. But here is an example of the goodness of our country at the founding. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 and passed again by the first Congress in 1789. And Michael, you know this. Those mighty words, from the law, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Now, as my dear pastor from old would say, so what? So what that it says that? Here's the so what. The Northwest Ordinance forbade slavery in the territory that we know that was that Oregon and Washington. No, we're talking about Ohio and Indiana and Michigan and so forth. What was then the Northwest Territory to the founding generation is to us the Midwest, right? Slavery was forbidden by federal law passed in 1789 by the very first Congress. So let's, of course, we condemn slavery, but the goodness of the country is evidenced so profoundly in the founding, including, of course, in the fashioning of the Bill of Rights in 1791.
Judge Ken Starr is our guest. We'll continue our conversation with him coming up.
The Michael Berry Show.
You're listening to the Michael Berry Show podcast, and we are proud to have as our sponsor Jim McIngvale, Gallery Furniture, because Mac gives back. You know, every person who owns a business can use that business for good. Mac helps us at Camp Hope, helping our veterans with PTSD. And if you know one, 877-717-PTSD. Let's get them the help they need. Helping the community, helping get jobs for people, helping bolster community spirit. That's what Mac does. and always does. Mac gives back. We're proud to be a part of that. We are talking to Judge Ken Starr. His book dropped yesterday. It's entitled Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. Judge, I hear many folks who reference separation of church and state, and I had a professor who recommended to me in law school something I had not read before, and that was Thomas Jefferson's letter to the church at Danbury. Can you talk a little bit about what separation of church means and, more importantly, does not mean, and how that applies today?
The idea of separation of powers, which Mr. Jefferson emphasized in his iconic letter to the Danbury Baptists in 1803, and he was President of the United States at that time. So this is a serious document. It's not the law of the land, but it has been referred to time and again by the Supreme Court of the United States. And so Mr. Jefferson articulated this metaphor of the wall of separation, and we're thankful for that wall of separation, because remember at the time that he wrote that letter, many states still had established churches. We forget that. Congress shall make no law respecting an established religion. What a great protection. We're not like England. We're not like Canada. There is a Church of England. It's the real thing. It is the established Church of England. We did not want that, at least at the federal level. And it was only, Michael, as you know, in 1833 that Massachusetts disestablished the Congregational Church, or the remnant of the great Puritan movement to New England. So that's the context in which Mr. Jefferson was writing. He did not want an established church. He fought in Virginia for the disestablishment of the Anglican Church or the Episcopal Church. That was the context. So sometimes we then have, and we saw this in the Supreme Court's decisions for about 20 years, but I think there was a misinterpretation of what the court was saying. Separation of church and state means you got to keep, I'm using this as an example. I use this in the book. I describe this in the book. These are real examples. Bible study clubs in public schools and high schools, stay out. No, the First Amendment gives those Bible study clubs, those Christian clubs or Jewish clubs, the right to organize and to be recognized by the school on the same basis as the chess club or the French club. The idea of you don't discriminate against religious groups and religious voices is so important. But guess what? It was 40 years ago, exactly, in the Reagan administration, and I was serving as chief of staff to the Attorney General of the United States, William French Smith, that the Justice Department was profoundly and very persuasively committed to the idea we are standing foursquare, President Reagan standing foursquare for the right of a religious club to meet on a public university campus. I tell that story. A breakthrough. It was one of those breakthroughs. So yes, let's believe in separation of church and state. Caesar, keep your hands off. Don't try to tell the Christian school. This is the EEOC case I referred to earlier in the Christian schools. Don't try to do as they do in China to appoint the bishops. Can you imagine? The Communist Party appointing Catholic bishops? Well, we're just not going to have that here in the United States of America. That should be kept separate. Caesar, keep your hands off.
What do you hope to accomplish, Judge Starr, with this book, Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty? What would be a win for this book?
For high school students, their parents, their grandparents, to read the book, to absorb the book, take notes, and then they can become advocates for freedom, because freedom is under assault. And you would say, well, that's just whatever happens in court. I'm not a lawyer, et cetera. No. We've got to be able to stand in the public arena, and that might be with your next-door neighbor, or it might be at a session of the city council considering an ordinance, or it might be the local school board, or it might even be in the Sunday school class when someone says, I don't think it's so bad to bake a cake or provide a floral arrangement for a same-sex wedding and so forth. I just don't understand. Read this book and then come to your own freedom of conscience view, your own opinion, but be able to stand up for the rights of those who do have issues and concerns and who cannot, like Jack Phillips, the baker from Denver, cannot in conscience bake a specialty cake to celebrate a same-sex wedding. I think there's a misunderstanding here. Jack Phillips will serve anyone who comes into his bake shop. He will bake a cake for anyone who comes into the bake. He cannot in conscience use his artistry to celebrate, as he has said in his testimony, I can't celebrate a divorce. I view that as unbiblical. I cannot celebrate Halloween. I'll celebrate Hallowed Evening or All Saints Day, but I view Halloween as demonic, etc. And I cannot bake a cake to honor a non-traditional marriage. And we should, in this country, historically, we have respected acts of conscience, or then the Supreme Court has intervened and respected acts of conscience and told Caesar, I'm using Caesar a lot, government, quit trying to compel people to do something that's antithetical to their conscience.
Well, and we saw this during the Obama administration with the Obamacare mandates, whereby the sisters were being required to fund abortion. At the very core of their faith, they were being asked to violate. And fortunately, I think the decision came down correctly, if I recall.
You're spot on. You're absolutely right. Shame on the Obama administration for intruding into the world of our sisters of the poor, the little sisters of the poor. Most fair-minded people and most reasonable people would just say, cut it out, Caesar. Government, you've gone too far. But President Biden has said, he hasn't said it recently, happily, no, I think our little sisters of the poor are just going to have to provide these contraceptives. But you're right, the Supreme Court of the United States struck yet another blow in favor of religious liberty. But ditto also, that might seem like a fairly easy case, but also for Hobby Lobby.
Right.
Hobby Lobby is a wonderful family-owned company.
Judge, can I hold you right there? Are you good on time? I'd like to keep you for one more segment if I could.
The Michael Berry Show. The Michael Berry Show.
Seems like yesterday, but it was long ago. Night, there in the darkness with the radio playing low end.
We are talking to Judge Ken Starr. You were going into the break. You mentioned the Hobby Lobby case, and got a lot of press. But for folks that don't know the kind of the details, the granular details of that case, speak to that if you would.
Yes, Hobby Lobby is family-owned, so it's not a publicly held company. You can't go buy stock. I'd love to buy stock at a Hobby Lobby, but it's privately held by the Green family, and the Green family, there are two generations, and now a rising third generation, very involved in this wonderful chain. And
I was
as
talking to Cheryl
deeply faithful evangelical Christians, when the Obama mandate came to provide 21 different forms of contraceptive methods and services, the Green family said we can, in conscience, provide 17 of the 21, but there are 4 of these mandated services that we view as abortifacients. We view the use of these particular methods as the taking of innocent human life. We cannot do that. The Supreme Court vindicated that freedom of conscience, even in a for-profit corporation. Admittedly, a close vote, but that doesn't matter. right? The key is getting to 5. And we got to 5 in that case. The Supreme Court once again vindicated religious liberty, the acts of conscience, even for a corporation. And that was part of the dividing line. Some of the dissenters said, my word, we would understand an individual, that's a Jack Phillips, but we can't understand how a for-profit corporation can avoid a, and you see the argument there, and it's a perfectly reasonable argument to make. But the Supreme Court rejected because of the strength of this, what I call in the book, the great principle, one of 6 great principles, freedom of conscience, including of the Green family.
John Roberts kind of gets off the hook here and gets a lot less attention for joining the 3 in the minority in a 5-4 split, but had Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg not passed, it's reasonable to assume, although she's proven us wrong sometimes, that she would have gone with them, but Amy Coney Barrett would not have been on the court, seat wouldn't have been open, in which case the 5 would have been the side that John Roberts joined. In which case, John Roberts' decision to join the minority and say, yes, the government can preclude at-home Bible study. What do you make of him joining the minority in that case?
The Chief Justice, I think, is being very deferential in a pandemic to government authorities. The scientists have spoken. The governors are elected by we, the people, and so the bright side, so to speak, is the Chief Justice is saying, yes, Caesar can go too far, but I'm not persuaded here. So I don't think it's a deep disagreement of principle. Remember, these cases that are going up, Michael, are on an emergency basis without the benefit of a full record, a full trial, and so forth, so that we've not been able in the religious freedom community to have all our ducks in a row, so to speak. So I'm very persuaded that when push comes to shove, he will still be a voice in favor of religious liberty. But I respectfully disagree. I respect him greatly. I've worked with him and have great respect for his ability and his integrity. But I respectfully disagree with him on this because the court, and thank goodness, I'm glad you mentioned Justice Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett. She has been speaking very, very eloquently and certainly voting in favor of religious liberty. But she's not a pushover. She's not saying, oh, religious liberty always wins. Remember that she did in a recent case say, the record hasn't established that singing in church is okay. And then we're going to say, wait a second. But, that's what the science is telling us, apparently, that singing is, in fact, but we don't need to get in the middle of that. The point that I'm trying to make is Amy Coney Barrett is going to take the cases one at a time and look at the cases with integrity, but she is definitely a voice in favor of freedom. Freedom is our baseline.
Well, I know a lot of people were hoping that would be the voice that she would represent on the court, given her background and personal convictions. Judge Ken Starr is our guest. The book is Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. It hit yesterday. It is available wherever you buy your books. Judge, I have just a couple of minutes left. I did want to get your perspective on the concept of impeachment. Obviously, the Clinton impeachment was a strong statement for a president who lied under oath. Deplorable behavior. It took years of your life to bring that case. What did you make of the second impeachment against President Trump? Almost this sort of slap him one more time as he walked out the door. Did that sort of dilute the effect, the power of the historical precedent of what impeachment means?
Yes, I think we, and I said this as a member of the president's team in the first impeachment, I did not defend the president's call to the president of the Ukraine. And I have said publicly I thought it showed poor judgment on his part, and I've made that clear in becoming a part of the team. But what I was absolutely emphatic on is that call did not represent an impeachable offense. I don't think the actions of January 6th represented an impeachable offense. I don't praise the president, the former president, for even the entire event, frankly. But the idea that this was incitement, I think, was quite far-fetched. And I'm not surprised that it fell short. My fundamental point, Michael, is, and I said this during President Trump's impeachment 1.0, we have entered the age of impeachment. We need to conclude that chapter because impeachment has become simply a political weapon as opposed to a tool of last resort for free people to free themselves, as was the case with Richard Nixon. That was a righteous, meritorious process of impeachment. And, of course, he resigned, so he did not go through the trial. But when you read those articles of impeachment against President Nixon, you say these are weighty. These are powerful. He participated in a crime, so there's the criminal dimension. But he also abused his power, not in the sense of, well, I disagree with his policy in Iran or North Korea. No. He misused and abused his power by using the forces of the FBI and the CIA to accomplish his political goals in ways that intruded upon the liberties of we the people. So it was a very righteous impeachment. That's what impeachment should be all about, as opposed to just a difference of opinion or political differences, which I think is what happened twice during the presidency of President Trump.
The book is Religious Liberty in Crisis, Exercising Your Faith in an Age of Uncertainty. It is available as of yesterday, which means you can buy it today. Judge Ken Starr, please come back and join us again. You're a thoughtful and wonderful guest.
It's that time. Lock and load. The Michael Berry Show is on the air.
The rule of law. I've been using that term a lot lately. I quoted President Eisenhower yesterday, for those of you who were listening, that the rule of law is most appreciated when you don't have it, because the rule of law is the sort of thing we take for granted until you don't. If when you buy a piece of property with a building on it, anybody in the neighborhood can come and burn it down, then chances are you're not going to spend a lot of money, make a lot of sacrifice to own that property. If everything you own can be taken from you, then you won't accumulate. You won't construct and build and improve. If you don't have basic security, then you don't have anything. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says we first have to be safe from attack. We don't want to go back to a state of nature. And we take for granted that we live under the rule of law. But that's a tenuous, delicate balance, and I would argue it is under attack. Good luck recruiting and retaining law enforcement officers to your department with this mindset. This is Mayor of Brooklyn Center in Minnesota telling an activist that he doesn't think police officers need to necessarily have weapons every time they're making a traffic stop.
Doing, everything we can to reduce the opportunity for officers to use deadly force in situations where they're not necessary. I would like to receive the full text of your request and make sure that, we sit down and go through it and see how we can implement. I don't believe that officers need to necessarily have weapons, every time they're making a traffic stop, or engaged in situations that don't necessarily call for weapons. We know that there are many other jurisdictions, or even around the world, where that is not, necessarily the case. It's not needed.
We have watched a terrible, terrible trend over the last couple of years. And it goes back to the community activist president, Barack Obama. Just remember, when you see these rabble-rousers out there now, that's what Barack Obama was. Community activist is a nice way of saying someone who is, in most of these cases, attempting to disrupt the social order. Change for the sake of change is not always good. What if, I don't know, you've owned that property for 40 years, little old lady, and you've lived there. Well, we need a change. Let's kick you out and give it to somebody that we favor instead. Senator Rand Paul talking about Dr. Fauci. Rand Paul, a doctor himself, says that Fauci is all about fear-mongering and that what he says isn't even matched by the science.
Now, immunity doesn't have to be perfect to be protective. It could be that possibly someone who's had COVID like myself, could they be reinfected? There are very small numbers of it, but guess what? Almost none of them are really getting sick. You're not reading stories of, oh my goodness, thousands of people have been reinfected, they're in the hospital and they're dying. Those stories don't exist. You'll read about a random, very rare person getting reinfected or getting infected when they've been vaccinated. But the good news is that even if you got infected from COVID after you've been vaccinated, you have some immunity, you have partial immunity, and it lessens the degree or significance of the disease. So almost everything out there is good news. This is why I so much think Dr. Fauci should be voluntarily removed from TV, because what he says is such a disservice and such fear-mongering, and almost all of what he says isn't even matched by the science of his own institute. So really what we need to do is hear from a lot of different experts, and then people need to realize that the risk factors are different depending on your age.
How many people let their elderly loved one die in loneliness because of the stupid advice of Dr. Fauci? How many children have missed out on in-person schooling that needed to be in school? In a video shared on Facebook, San Marcos, California high school teacher Alyssa Pirro can be heard raising her voice at several juniors during a virtual lesson conducted over Zoom. Pirro appears to be referencing an ongoing lawsuit launched by a coalition of parents against California's Governor Gavin Newsom and 6 North Country school districts seeking to ease COVID restrictions and accelerate a return to physical classrooms. You're going to hear this California high school teacher say to the students, if your parents want to talk to me about their profession and their opinion on their profession, I would love to hear that. However, if your parent wants to come talk to me about how I'm not doing a good enough job in distance learning based on what you need as an individual, just dare them to come at me, because I am so sick to my stomach of parents trying to tell educators how to do their jobs.
If your parent wants to talk to me about their profession and their opinion on their profession, I would love to hear that. I know very little about anything else in the world other than education, okay? However, if your parent wants to come talk to me about how I'm not doing a good enough job in distance learning based on what you need as an individual, just dare them to come at me. Because I'm so sick to my stomach of parents trying to tell educators how to do their job. I have never once gone to a doctor's appointment and tried to tell my medical health provider how to treat me. You know why? Because I know nothing about that. I didn't get my degree in medicine. I am going off. I'm sorry. This is my go off period.
What a complete bitch. First of all, never, ever undercut the respect for young people, among young people, for their parents. This is a great example of the state through the school undercutting the authority in the life of a young person, of that young person's parent. You know why teachers like that woman hate parents? Because parents are their rivals. Parents are their rivals in who will guide and teach the values of that child. That's what you're experiencing right there. How dare that woman? Those parents and the rest of us pay her salary. You better get used to having somebody look over your shoulder because you work for us, lady!
The Michael Berry Show continues.
You're listening to The Michael Berry Show, and I want to brag on my friend Jim McInville, Mac, Gallery Furniture, for just a moment. You know, I want this show to be where you learn about what's going on in the world and talk about good food and culture and parenting and adoption and everything else. But I also want it to be about more than that. I want us to use this show for good. And I look at what Jim McInville does at Gallery Furniture, and he does good for the community, for our veterans, for those in need, for children. He does so much for our community using his business to do it. And that's why I buy my furniture from Mac. Mac gives back. One of the most destructive elements of the swamp is their love of war. And interestingly, it is the issue upon which they are the most bipartisan. They love war, partly because the war industry funds them. It's a big, big thing for them. Almost nobody ever crosses the war industry. And if you do, you do so to your political peril. They have attempted to take down Senator Rand Paul, and they undercut every word his father, Dr. Ron Paul, said over the years. They have convinced a lot of people in media and politics that going to war makes us safe, that we have to fight the bad guys abroad or else we'll have to fight them here. And that's why we go poking people around the world in their eyeballs and then wondering why, when this same war-loving group of politicians brings those people to this country, they blow things up. How about we keep the bad guys out of our country and we stay out of their country and let them handle their own affairs? President Trump, to his credit, wanted to end the forever wars. And in fact, coming up later on the show, we talked to former Texas governor and then under President Trump, Secretary of Energy, Governor Rick Perry, along with Morgan Luttrell, Marcus Luttrell's brother. Morgan is been to medical school. He's a Navy SEAL himself. He's actually Marcus Luttrell's hero, which Marcus will be the first person to tell you, his twin brother. They were at the Capitol in the Texas Capitol today in Austin, Texas, where they are arguing and building a bipartisan coalition to support a study on psychedelic drug treatment. It's psilocybin, I guess it's a mushroom-based product, as I understand it, for veterans with PTSD. You probably know this already, but if you didn't, I'm the spokesman for Camp Hope, which is PTSD Foundation of America, which provides absolutely free to the veteran and to the government 6-month program, peer-to-peer, for veterans suffering from PTSD. Any veteran can get help from around the country. We'll get them to Houston. That call you make is going to be picked up by another veteran who's been where you've been. 877-717-PTSD. 877-717-PTSD. It'll save your life And if you don't understand that your life is valuable, trust me, everybody around you believes it is. They want you to get help, they want you to heal, and they want you here for a very long time. And Camp Hope will help you get there. 877-717-PTSD. But to that point, a lot of our veterans come back scarred by war. You think about what Marcus and Morgan Luttrell have been through, for instance. It is a passion of theirs, serving veterans who come home. So the hope is that this treatment, which has shown initial promise, will be able to help heal and treat veterans suffering from PTSD. We're losing 22 veterans per day to PTSD. We've lost more Vietnam War veterans to suicide when they came home than we did to war in Vietnam, and we lost a lot in war. It wiped out a portion of a generation. Well, President Trump, to his credit, had announced that by May 1st, he had put in motion our troops would be brought home from Afghanistan, putting an end to the forever war. Joe Biden has now announced that the troops will not be moved out by May 1st, and he has pushed the date to September 11th. Well, of course, Bill Kristol and Max Boot and all the others are screaming and hooting and hollering, and they want the troops to be committed to stay there forever because they're not having to serve. There is a sick fetish among the neocons, a sick, fetishistic love of war. And when Donald Trump said, "I'm getting us out of those wars," they screamed and hollered and said, "Oh my God, our nation won't be safe." We're not safer because we fight wars in Afghanistan. And if you believe that, you probably believe the masks are working. You probably believe the lockdowns are efficient. And you were probably shocked at the New York Times headline today that said it turns out that exercise reduces the likelihood that you'll die of COVID. Who could have guessed when you were ordering people to stay in their homes, sit on their couch, and get fat and not go to the gym? They tell you a lot of lies. A lot of lies. And one of them is that fighting wars all over the world all the time, forever, is somehow keeping us safer. Because it's not. You know what else is not keeping us safer? Open borders. Illegal aliens streaming in. Guatemala's president says that the coyotes used Joe Biden's comments to tell families that we'll take care of the children here in the United States. And that gave an incentive, an inducement to the people of his country to head on up.
The president has been talking and speaking very compassionately about migration, certainly children migration. Do you believe the president's message of compassion about children coming to the United States is making the situation worse or is indirectly encouraging migrants to informally migrate to the U.S.?
Bueno, no soy quien para juzgar. I
am nobody to make a judgment here, but I believe in the first few weeks of the Biden administration, messages were confusing. There were compassionate messages that were understood by people in our country, especially the coyotes, to tell families, we'll take the children. The children can go in, and once the children are there, they will call their parents. And so those messages were confusing, not because of the way they were communicated, but because of the way they were translated here.
So a huge wave of migrant unaccompanied children starts. That's a matter of concern because as soon as they cross the border between Mexico and the U.S., they fall into the hands of cartels, prostitution networks, and so on.
That was Guatemalan President Alejandro Giammattei, and obviously it was translated. Chad Nakanishi gave me a note this morning that said the House of Representatives was set to pass Shirley Jackson Lee's Slavery Reparations Commission bill today. and I can't even bring myself to check and see if they did. It should die in the Senate, but these are the sorts of things that Shirley Jackson Lee is up to. A bill to create a commission to study and implement a system to provide federal reparations to the descendants of black slaves. The Washington Examiner reports, the Judiciary Committee, run by Democrats, is expected to advance the legislation to the House floor in a vote on Wednesday. This bill was introduced 3 decades ago by the late Congressman John Conyers, a Michigan Democrat. And the measure gained traction in the last 2 years after Democrats regained control of Congress and a new racial justice movement spread across the nation. Let me say this in no uncertain terms. Reparations is a divisive issue designed to split black people from being independent politically. The Democrats cannot afford to lose their 90+% control of the black bloc. They don't want people to integrate. They don't want people to have their own jobs. They don't want people to get off the public tit, because if they ever did, they wouldn't vote Democrat again.
The Michael Berry Show.
Former Governor and Secretary of Energy Rick Perry and Marcus Luttrell's brother Morgan, also a Navy SEAL with a medical background, were at the Capitol in Texas today pushing for psychedelic drug treatment in Texas for veterans with PTSD. Woody Guthrie moved to the Texas panhandle town of Pampa in 1929. He was performing with bands at nightclubs and radio stations in the panhandle, writing songs, lots of them. 6 years later, on this day in 1935, a great dust storm covered Pampa, Texas. And having married a Pampa girl, Mary Jennings, in 1933, expecting to stay there, but then experiencing the pain of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, sources of many of his songs that appealed to his fellow sufferers. But after the big storm, April 14, 1935, occurred, some Pampans thought that the end of the world was upon them, and there was just time for final goodbyes. Tired of the dust and the poverty, Woody Guthrie left for Los Angeles in 1937. Governor, were you there when the big dust storm hit Pampa in 35? Governor? Governor,
Hello.
Were you there in Pampa when the big dust storm hit in 1935?
I was not, but I was in Haskell County when a lot of dust storms came through in the 50s. I'm pretty sure it was probably left over from those days.
You know your dust storms, are you saying?
I don't have many dust storms in Round Top, Texas, but they were memorable back in the 50s.
Well, I got news this morning that you're going to be at the Capitol at 10:15 this morning with your good friend Morgan Luttrell, one half of the esteemed Luttrell brothers family, also a decorated veteran and a man of medicine, as part of a bipartisan attempt to open up, well, I guess to talk about psychedelic treatments for veterans with PTSD. How'd you get involved with this?
Yeah, and Morgan's with me here in the vehicle, so we're driving over to Austin, as you correctly said. I think 10:30 is the kickoff for this.
Well,
press
welcome
conference.
him. He's welcome to join in at any time.
Alex Dominguez is the legislator who's carrying this, a Democrat from down in the Valley, former prosecutor. And listen, this all goes back to when Marcus came to live with us at the governor's residence back in 2007. And we saw the effects of post-traumatic stress, the opioid addiction, a lot of different challenges that we had. Started my wife and I on a track 14 years ago to find the solutions, and it's taken us down a lot of different avenues, some that have been helpful, some that were just dead ends. But what we found, and particularly in the 3 years that I spent up in Washington at the Department of Energy, is that the use of historically illicit drugs, the psychedelics, have some very potent and positive impact on these veterans' mental health if they're properly dosed, properly handled, and obviously followed up with. And that's what this piece of legislation does, very narrowly, dealing with, in this case, psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in the old drug that was abused in the 60s called magic mushrooms. And this is going to be a university hospital working with the Veterans Hospital with the appropriate medical individuals. And I'm very, very excited that the state of Texas can lead the charge in bringing our veterans to a place that they find some normalcy in their lives, be able to handle the depression, the anxiety, obviously the ensuing suicides that we're seeing. And if there's one group of people in this country that we owe this, thinking outside of the maybe the normal realm, it's the veterans in our country. They have been at war 20 years, Michael. And if there's a group that we need to give hope to, it's our veterans for sure.
Governor, can you ask Morgan to step in? I want to know from a purely medical perspective, what are these psychedelic drugs hopefully doing to the brain that helps treat PTSD?
I'm very careful, very clear about what we're seeing in the scientific space on the breakthrough, if you will, or if that's how you want to articulate it, of how these medications are what they're really doing is breaking through that barrier that typical cognitive therapies are having difficulty doing. Now, what we're seeing is a breakdown, if you will, of a defense mechanism or the ego that therapists typically cannot do when they're sitting in front of their veteran. So the research is there, and I'm gonna caveat this. I was very much against this in the past few years, and seeing all this come up through the DOE and coming through the Veterans Affairs and just coming into the scientific space. I was very stuck on the taboo, the bastardization of these psychedelic drugs. Psychedelic drugs, that word itself scares people off, and it doesn't need to be that way anymore, because what we're seeing is that the science is actually there. And in a controlled, sustained environment where it's introduced to individuals that have symptomatic or problematic issues, whether that's depression, anxiety, if you want to categorize that underneath the post-traumatic stress umbrella, these medications are really making a movement in the space that we haven't been able to do before. And that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. And I honestly believe, after doing years of research on this, that we've found something that will successfully lower our problems in the veteran, our first responder, or just this transcends veterans and first responder space. We're focusing on veterans now, but this could very well be a breakthrough that saves hundreds of thousands of lives across not only our country but the world. And what a better place to do that than start here in Texas, where we have such a large veteran community.
Morgan, I hope you're right. If y'all can hold with me for just a minute, I want to ask you, Morgan, your thoughts on whether this is potentially a gateway drug. And I want to ask the governor how you start building, because he's done this for advocacy issues, for policy positions, how you start building public support for this. If y'all can hang with me for just a moment. Governor Rick Perry and Morgan Luttrell coming up.
The Michael Berry Show.
Governor Rick Perry and Navy SEAL Morgan Luttrell will be at the Capitol at 10:15 this morning as part of a bipartisan support group to study psychedelic drugs in the treatment of veterans with PTSD. Morgan, I would ask you, with your medical background to opine on whether this is a potential gateway drug. Some of the PTSD folks I've talked to have said they can't say that it is or it isn't, but obviously that is a concern because addiction is such a problem with veterans with PTSD. What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's something that we're very concerned about. And like, can it have the opportunity to be a gateway drug like every other drug that just gets onto the market or gets into these spaces and runs rampant? Yes. I'll be the first one to tell you that is a very tangible threat. But that's why we're getting out in front of this, putting the right people in place to control it in a way that we reduce the chances of that happening. And you come to a crossroad where you have to argue the point. It's like, hey, look, okay, and this is Morgan's opinion. Are we at a point where if we try this, we save lives? What are the statistical values of? Yeah, there's going to be a percentage of people that might take advantage of this, but does that outweigh saving the lives of those who saved so many? It's an argument that it can and will be made. Now, as a veteran, when if 1 in 2 veterans in our country know somebody who killed themselves, 1 in 5 are related to somebody like that. Now, you speak to people like that. There's a small chance or opportunity that you can break down that mental barrier and bring someone back to their livelihood. I think that you can't argue that. And it goes into our leadership. It goes into those in the scientific and the research world, the medical space, to say, hey, look, we're going to do this the right way and not just cut this loose and advertise it in a way like, oh, yeah, this is great. Go have a great time. No, that's not what this is. This is a very structured. We want to regiment this. We want to make sure that we have the science, the statistics behind this before it goes any further. And that just starts with the passing of this bill and the proper study.
Morgan, you've seen a lot of things, and obviously you're very well adjusted, and I guess everyone copes in their own way. One of the things I hear from veterans at Camp Hope suffering from PTSD and from the professionals who work with them is that what you've seen and witnessed and experienced is horrible and can cause nightmares, but that equally difficult in coping and readjusting and integrating back into society is the feeling you miss of fulfillment to your work and the camaraderie with, for you it's teams, but the camaraderie with your guys, your buds, your folks, whether it's Marines, Army, you name it, and that's so overwhelming that they can't get that back, and that's what makes them feel broken. Do you have a thought on that?
I do. So the military, and it doesn't matter which branch, we do a very good job. We were at war for 20 years, or have been. So you got to appreciate the aggression that individuals, when they enter into the services, of what we need and want out of our service members. And so the reason that service members have a hard time acclimating after they leave is because the military does a poor job. They do a great job about building the individual that they need in any particular service, whether that's Army, Marines, Navy, and then spec war, however you want to, whatever you want to look at. But when it's time to get off the train doesn't stop at the station. It keeps moving, and you're offloaded in a hurry. Now, the problem with that is they do such a great job of building you up. They do a very poor job. And is that a good thing or a bad thing, or is it just a thing? They don't have the mechanisms in place to offload and break some or rebuild somebody to put them back into society. So when these service members are exiting the service, they're walking. I was in the military one day, and the next day I wasn't, and I'm in college, a 20-year-old, but I still have the mentality that I'm a SEAL or I'm a service member, and that's very challenging for. I was an adult too. Imagine the kids that went into the service at 18 and came out at 28, and all they've ever known is somebody telling them what to do, where to go, what to wear, how to walk, talk, everything. And then all of a sudden they're thrust into the civilian population where nobody is paying any attention to that whatsoever. So relearning is very challenging. It took me years to reacclimate back to civilian society. And there's an expectation there in the service community sometimes that the world will be there to pick you up when you leave, and that is just not the case. And when you don't have your teammates and you don't have someone who is going to provide you a paycheck every day, or if you get hungry, you can go to the chow hall and get something to eat, and you're just alone, that's very overwhelming, because if you were 18, you had the state telling you had to go to school. You're never going to be without. Somehow we'll put a roof over your head. But when you're an adult, that's not the case. And that's one of the areas that I believe that we have a miss, and why you see service members that just seem so lonely and out of place, because they are. Not all of them, of course. There's a very large percentage very well when they walk out. But again, there are those that have those problems, and those are the ones that we're wanting to pay close attention to.
Morgan, I want to ask you to take 1 minute to answer, because I want to get the governor back for about a minute and a half after that. I know we're talking about studying now, and I don't expect you to have all the answers. But how do you think this psychedelic drugs, what effect does this have on the brain that helps counter PTSD, as far as you can tell at this point?
So I wish I had an answer to that, because the problem first foremost problem, we're dealing with the brain. And the brain is very unique to every single individual. There's no brain alike. So when you're a researcher like I am and like we are, it's hard to do a general study on a bunch of individuals, because we're talking about the brain, we're talking about emotions here, emotional instability, cognitive dysfunction. So what we're seeing in the research, and this is where science and theory, and whether or not you want to put religion in it, this is where it may sound crazy what I'm going to say, because as a scientist, I base all my data and all my information off empirical data. I look at the numbers. But what we're seeing with the psychedelic treatments or the medications in the psychedelic space is that it seems to be opening up the mind in a way that researchers can't put their finger on. And will we ever be able to do that? I don't know, and I don't have the answer to the question, because we don't know how the brain works. I mean, how does a 3-pound gelatinous substance contemplate thought, contemplate contemplation of thought? I mean, we just don't have those answers. And if you don't know how something works, you really can't put into scientific terminology, this is what's going on. And with the psychedelic space and the medications that we are seeing that are making a difference, it seems to activate the brain and have it gives an individual the ability to address things internally that they normally wouldn't do. We see that, hey, talking to veterans that have gone through these treatments, it's like, I had 20 years of therapy in 3 days, and it varies. Everyone's depiction, everyone's journey, everyone's experience is completely different. But what we're seeing is like, hey, look, it allowed me to let my guard down in a way where I could address the things that were bothering me, showed me things that I needed to do. It allowed me to I don't know if role play might be the best way to say that, or I wish I had the terminology to articulate it.
Morgan, hold right there. Hold for just about 20 seconds. Yep. Wait right there. Thanks for listening to The Michael Berry Show. You can hear all of our episodes. We break out our interviews as a separate show so that you can get to those easily. If you enjoy a show, please take a moment, send a link to your friend, family member that you think might enjoy it as well. You can always drop me an email, michaelberryshow.com. It says send Michael an email. Those come directly to me. And I want to say a big thanks to Mattress Mac, Jim McInvale, Gallery Furniture. Mac gives back. And that is because in addition to being really, really good in the furniture business, he uses that business to give back to the community. He helps us with Camp Hope and our veterans with PTSD. He helps the community, whether we've just been flooded and need a place to stay. He helps us with folks that are trying to find jobs. Everything I've ever asked him to do, he steps up and does, and he does so many things I don't know about. And we're proud to be a partner with him. We're proud to have him supporting our show. Matt gives back, and I buy my furniture at Gallery Furniture.